It happened in the dark. A flash, a tremor, then silence, swallowing the ridge. The mission was clean until it wasn't. Metal buckled, air turned electric, and the ground came up faster than sound. I remember the smell before the pain, fuel, dust, cordite, and the way the world went narrow, framed by the pulse in my ears. Training took over where thought ended. Hands moved, fire receded, breath returned, slow and shallow. Survival wasn't luck. It was discipline, paid in seconds. Later, command called it a malfunction. I called it a lesson. Drop a comment if you've ever been close enough to hear your own heartbeat echo in static, because this wasn't about failure. It was about what remains when the noise finally stops. The rotors carved the thin air above the Kunar Valley, their rhythm steady, mechanical, almost prayerful. Below, the mountains rose like dark fortresses, jagged silhouettes cut from the early dawn. The valley was quiet, older than the men who moved through it, older than the wars that had scarred its soil. At 0500 hours, the insertion began. Captain Erin Cole sat nearest the open ramp, her hand steady on the rifle across her chest. Wind lashed her gear, tugging at the straps of her pack. The light from her headlamp flickered across a row of focused faces, Marines who needed no words. Harlan, the team sergeant, checked his watch without looking up. Reyes, the youngest of them, leaned slightly forward, eyes fixed on the shifting terrain below. It was a ritual of readiness, silent and complete. The helicopter banked into the valley, the pilot's voice cutting briefly through the comms, clipped, controlled, final. Then came the drop in altitude, the sudden gravity shift that settled everything into motion. Boots hit the ground in unison. Cold air bit through layers of fabric. The mountain air smelled of dust and oil and something metallic, like rain that never fell. The bird lifted away, vanishing into fog. For a moment, all sound collapsed. No rotors, no voices, only the steady hum of their own breathing. The world around them had texture-loose rock grinding underfoot, distant water moving somewhere unseen, wind moving through pines with the sound of whispered warning. Cole adjusted her pack and raised her binoculars toward the ridge. The mission was simple on paper. Verify the disappearance of an Afghan scout team last seen transmitting near Grid 17F, a high saddle known for ambush trails and narrow choke points. In reality, simple had never applied here. The valley had its own laws, steep, silent, and indifferent. She gave a brief hand signal. The line moved forward in staggered formation. Every movement was clean, deliberate, efficient. The Marines advanced with the quiet confidence of routine, spacing measured, sectors covered, each man aware of his field of fire and the one beside it. Cole's mind worked ahead of her feet, already charting fallback routes, overwatch angles, and dead ground. Years of repetition made the planning automatic, but the stillness pressed harder than usual today. By 0545 hours, they reached the first checkpoint, a cluster of crumbling stone huts long abandoned. The air here carried an odd static, a faint hiss that came and went through the radio net. Cole raised her antenna slightly, scanning the tree line. "Talk. This is Recon Actual," she transmitted. Silence answered back. Not even static now, just the absence of anything. The team spread out, Harlan moving to higher elevation, Reyes marking coordinates on his handheld GPS. A thin mist had begun to rise, curling over the ridge like breath. The mountains seemed to listen, not threatening, but aware. The quiet was too complete, too intent. Cole crouched beside a small cairn, fresh, recently built. A gloved hand brushed aside loose rock to reveal a snapped-off antenna and the faded corner of a tactical map. A mark in red pencil circled their exact coordinates. The previous team had made it this far. She felt the cold settle differently then. Not just temperature, but recognition. The pattern of the mountain shifted from neutral to watching. She looked up toward the dark ridgeline, exhaling slow through her nose. Behind her, the others adjusted their gear, unspoken trust holding the silence together. Then, in her earpiece, a sound, faint, brittle, static. A brief burst of broken transmission, cut short as quickly as it came. Cole froze, head tilting slightly, listening to the dead channel. The mountain gave nothing back. Her mentor's words echoed quietly in memory. The mountain listens longer than men do. She stood, scanning the ridgeline once more. The light was shifting now, thinner, colder. The air carried a weight she could not name. Without a word. Cole motioned forward. The team began their ascent, measured, silent, disciplined, moving deeper into the valley's watchful silence. Ahead waited the part of the mountain that did not forgive sound. The static came first, faint, uneven, like wind through broken glass. A half-second burst across the comms, the kind that made every man pause. The Overwatch call sign was mid-transmission when the noise cut out. Then nothing. Only the soft hum of interference that faded into silence. Captain Erin Cole froze for a moment, her eyes tracking the ridgeline above. The light was shifting, the blue of early morning thinning into the colorless clarity of day. Each movement of the team carried a practiced rhythm, but in that quiet, it felt amplified. The click of a safety, the crunch of gravel under boot. Breathing. Always breathing. They moved deeper into the defile, a narrow cut of terrain where the mountain walls leaned in close. Shadows pooled thick at the base of the rock. Swallowing sound. Cole checked her GPS, then her wrist compass. Bearings correct. Terrain wrong. The echo she expected from each call and response vanished before it reached her ears. At 0600 hours, the last clean signal from Overwatch confirmed elevation and visual coverage. By 0615, updates ceased entirely. Cole's radio hissed again. A burst, clipped, broken, as if something pressed down on the frequency. She toggled channels, tested gain, static. She tried once more. Overwatch. This is recon actual. The silence that followed felt dense enough to touch. Harlan lifted his head, scanning the ridge through optics. Nothing but wind moving through pine needles and dust rising in thin sheets. The Overwatch position should have been visible, a white rock face halfway up the ridge. Instead, the angle was distorted by haze and shadow. Cole noted the interference pattern, logged the time. It was not procedure anymore. It was ritual. They continued up the defile. Wind pressed through the valley like a steady hand, constant and indifferent. The temperature dropped as the terrain tightened. Thin air meant slower breathing, and the quiet between steps became a metronome of human endurance. Reyes was point man now, his motion efficient but wary. His shoulders had stiffened, small tells that meant unease. The kind of unease that came when the world began to listen back. Cole's voice remained even when she spoke over the net, though no one replied. She paced their advance by terrain features, rock shelves, fallen logs, the slow rhythm of movement that felt both purposeful and endless. The valley stretched like a corridor, built to erase men. At 0700 hours, the team reached a small plateau. A smell lingered there. Acrid, metallic, faintly scorched. Cole knelt beside a patch of disturbed soil. Scattered brass casings lay half buried in the dust, dull from exposure. She brushed one clean. The ridge above showed a faint smear of black, as if something had burned fast and clean against the stone. Harlan moved to cover the perimeter, slow and deliberate. His body language said what his voice didn't need to contact had been made here. But the aftermath was wrong. No bodies, no tracks leading away. Just impact marks, scuffed rock, and silence that felt too contained, as if the mountain had taken sound for itself. Cole keyed her mic again, out of duty more than expectation. Overwatch. This is recon actual. Acknowledge. Static rose, soft at first, then cracked sharply. 3 bursts spaced evenly apart. Not code, not random, like an echo of something mechanical repeating itself. Then quiet. She turned slightly, eyes sweeping the tree line. The mist that had lingered at dawn was gone now, replaced by a dry wind carrying dust from higher elevations. The valley below looked empty, but the emptiness felt intentional, constructed, almost. Each minute without response made procedure heavier, like armor that no longer protected but confined. Reyes's head turned toward her, eyes questioning, but silent. She gave a single nod, her expression unbroken. Leadership wasn't the absence of fear, it was precision in its presence. Every order was quiet, every gesture exact. She recalibrated the squad's spacing, tightened their formation, and signaled a descent along a secondary route. By 0800 hours, the light had sharpened. The air shimmered faintly where heat rose from the valley floor, creating illusions of movement that weren't there. Cole checked the altimeter, elevation correct, coordinates exact. Still no response. She entered the notation into her logbook. Comms failure. Last contact, 0615 hours. Then a pause. Her pencil hesitated just long enough to betray thought. She added 2 more words. Last signal. The team moved again, but slower now. There was no hurry and uncertainty, only method. The terrain forced them into a rhythm that bordered on meditation. Step, stop, scan, listen, repeat. Each sound became an anchor, the clink of gear, the rustle of fabric, the heartbeat in her own ears. Without overwatch, every decision felt multiplied. Every ridge held potential threat and the echo of their own restraint. They reached a narrow gully where the walls funneled wind into a constant hum. Cole paused, resting a gloved hand against the rock. It was warm, still holding heat from something recent. She looked upward, tracing a shallow scar across the stone. Not lightning, not erosion. The mark curved like shrapnel spread, a reminder that the mountain didn't forget. The silence grew heavier as they pushed on. The radios remained dead. Even the wind began to falter, replaced by stillness that pressed against the eardrums. The kind of quiet that made men think of distance not as space, but as separation. Cole's breathing slowed deliberately, matching rhythm to control. Inside her chest, each inhale felt weighted. Her eyes swept the horizon one last time. The valley stretching away in deceptive calm. No movement, no sound. Just the steady pulse of her own discipline. When she closed her logbook, the motion was careful, reverent. She looked once more toward the Overwatch Ridge, then down at the soil marked by brass and ash. The mountain offered no explanation, only silence. She marked the entry with a final note before rising to move on last signal. The wind returned a moment later, thin, cold, and wordless. It carried their movement forward, down the valley's spine, toward whatever waited unseen. The flare rose without warning, a single streak of green light clawing through the mist, burning cold against the sky. It wasn't theirs. Wrong color, wrong code. For a heartbeat, the valley seemed to hold its breath. Then the echo came, a hollow thump rolling through stone, distant but deliberate. Captain Erin Cole's eyes tracked the flare until it dissolved into ash above the ridge. The team had been moving in low light, disciplined and silent. Now, the air changed. The mist thickened, curling like smoke around their gear. The stillness felt staged, the kind that came before something irreversible. She signaled for perimeter. The team moved with precision, Harlan to the left flank, Reyes downslope, the others forming a rough semicircle around the defile's mouth. No one spoke. The language of movement replaced speech, the lift of a rifle barrel, the shift of boots finding cover. The sharp inhale before stillness. Cole crouched near a boulder slick with condensation, her eyes narrowing against the fog. The first shot broke the silence. A single crack from above. High ground. maybe 200 yards. The sound hit, then splintered across the valley. Another followed. Then 3 more. Sharper. Closer. The incoming rounds struck rock, spitting fragments into the air. The team folded into cover without hesitation, muscle memory faster than fear. Cole counted the rhythm. 2-second bursts. A pause. Then movement in the tree line. Ambush. Coordinated. Multi-directional. She keyed her radio out of instinct, even though she knew the line was dead. The hiss of static returned like mockery. Rounds snapped over her head, the sound changing pitch as they broke the air. Harlan returned fire in short. Disciplined bursts. 3 rounds. Shift position. 3 more. Reyes covered the lower sector, firing uphill toward muzzle flash that flared and disappeared like lightning. Cole moved between them, low and controlled, calculating distance and angle. Her voice was steady when she gave hand signals, each motion deliberate: suppressive fire, fallback line, elevation change. Then came the mortar, 1 round, low trajectory, a hollow pop followed by a concussive slam that flattened the mist into a wave of dust. The explosion was close, too close. The world compressed to vibration and noise. Ears rang. Pebbles rained from the ridge. The smell of burnt cordite filled the air, thick and metallic. When the smoke cleared enough to see, Harlan was down, not dead, not yet, but hit along the flank. He pressed one hand to his side, blood running through his glove. His other hand pointed to Cole, the gesture small but unmistakable command. She didn't hesitate. Command wasn't given. It was inherited in silence. Cole shifted position, scanning through her optic. The high ground was still active, multiple shooters coordinating from elevation. She assessed terrain: steep slope, loose shale, poor cover beyond 30 yards. Their only chance was to move laterally, use defilade, and break contact under concealment. The decision came fast because it had to. Her hand signaled movement: 2 fingers, left flank, leapfrog pattern. Reyes caught it immediately, adjusting his line of fire to cover their withdrawal. The others followed without question. Training and trust left no space for panic. The team moved in bursts. 10 yards. Cover. Suppress. The sound of rounds hitting stone was constant, a sharp, metallic chatter. Cole's lungs burned as she ran, each breath pulled thin in the cold air. She felt the impact of concussions in her chest more than her ears, the pressure like heartbeat against bone. Harlan stayed conscious long enough to reload once, his rounds steady despite the blood loss. When he could no longer fire, he propped the rifle across his knee, a final act of defiance against chaos. Cole caught his eyes briefly, enough to understand he was still aware, still present. Then she turned away, not out of detachment, but duty. They reached partial cover near a dry creek bed. Cole dropped behind a fallen tree, her gloved hands working fast. Count ammo, check positions, confirm head count. 1 missing. She scanned the ridge. Reyes was still up, 50 yards to the right, firing controlled pairs. The sound of his rifle was a metronome against the uneven percussion of the enemies. Cole raised her head just enough to catch the reflection of a scope glinting from higher ground. She shifted, fired once, and the light vanished. The silence that followed was brief, but distinct, the kind that means impact. The next minutes blurred into motion and instinct. Cole coordinated a deception, timed bursts from alternating positions to simulate a larger force. They staggered the cadence, making the valley echo. It worked. Fire slackened, then drifted upward as the enemy adjusted focus. She used that window to move Harlan, Reyes covering her flank. Every lift of his body drew sound from his wounds, but he remained quiet. Pride held the pain down. When they finally reached the lower ridge, the light had dimmed again. The flare smoke still hung in the air, faint and green. Cole's breath formed ghosts in the cold, mingling with the dust. The team collapsed into defensive posture, rifles leveled toward the approach they'd escaped from. For a long time, there was nothing. Only wind moving through rock and the slow tick of cooling metal. The mountain felt both close and endless. Cole's ears still rang, the world muted and slow. She looked to Harlan, whose eyes were open but unfocused. His breathing was shallow, deliberate. His rifle lay across his chest, finger still near the trigger. She tightened the tourniquet on his leg, the motion mechanical but gentle. They were alive. Barely, but alive. The ambush hadn't destroyed them. It had refined them into something harder, quieter. The kind of silence that followed wasn't defeat. It was recognition. Cole keyed the radio again, knowing it was futile. The static answered like breath through a hollow pipe. Still, she tried once more, because that was what command required. Not hope, but persistence. Recon. Actual. Reposition complete. She said to no one. Survivors accounted for. Her words fell into the void. No acknowledgement came. She took one last look up the valley, the smoke, the ridge, the faint shimmer of heat above rock. The mountain seemed indifferent, its silence not cruel but absolute. By 0900 hours, the firing had stopped completely. Cole reorganized what remained of the team. Reduced strength, limited ammunition, no comms, no overwatch. She mapped the next movement by terrain memory, marking the route to extraction in pencil on the back of her hand. Before moving, she paused. A single moment of stillness. Her hand brushed against the patch on Harlan's shoulder, the one faded from years of deployment. The contact was brief. Unspoken respect. Then she rose, rifle in hand, and signaled forward. No words, no reassurance, just the act of continuing. Behind them, smoke lifted like breath from the valley floor, curling skyward into fading green. Ahead, the mountain waited, silent, immense, and watching. The gunfire had ended hours ago. In its place came the rain, a steady, indifferent rhythm tapping against spent casings and torn fabric. The valley that had echoed with violence was now mute, stripped bare of sound except for the quiet persistence of weather. Captain Erin Cole sat in the shallow mouth of a rock overhang, the remnants of her team drawn inward around a makeshift perimeter. The ground was wet, sloping, littered with debris from the firefight. The air carried the faint metallic tang of cordite mixed with earth, and when the wind shifted, she could smell blood, faint, old, already cooling. Reyes was alive but fading, a field dressing tight around his thigh, breath coming shallow through gritted teeth. The other Marine, Weller, drifted in and out of consciousness, his arm in a crude splint made from a snapped rifle stock. They lay close for warmth, silent under ponchos that did little against the cold. Cole moved between them methodically, checking vitals, tightening wraps, rationing morphine. There was nothing dramatic about her care. It was ritual, precise, necessary. Night pressed down early in the mountains. Visibility shrank to the reach of a headlamp dimmed to red light. Cole switched it off after 20 minutes. Darkness was safer than visibility. Her eyes adjusted slowly. The rain turned to sleet, faint crystals melting against her face. She marked the time, 23:40 hours, in her notebook. The small act of writing steadied her. Leadership, she knew, was measured most clearly in silence. The talk was beyond reach. The overwatch was gone. Command existed now as discipline sustained by memory. Her radio gave a faint hiss every few minutes, dying static, barely audible. She kept it close anyway, one gloved hand resting on the casing. The thin trickle of noise was proof the world still existed beyond the valley, even if distant and indifferent. Cole leaned against the rock and exhaled, her breath fogging briefly before dissolving into the dark. Fatigue pressed in waves, each one asking her to close her eyes just a little longer. But she didn't. The mountain demanded wakefulness. She forced her thoughts into sequence water. Shelter. Med check. Comms. Repeat. Survival wasn't courage. It was process. Around 0100 hours. The rain eased to a mist. The valley took on a pale luminescence. Starlight filtered through low clouds. The mountains revealed their shape again, immense, unfeeling, endless. Cole scanned the ridgeline and saw a faint glow higher up. It flickered once, weak and amber, not firelight, not lightning. A reflection, maybe metal catching a break in the clouds. The overwatch position. She hesitated. The climb would be brutal, steep, cold, exposed. But her instincts overruled exhaustion. Confirmation mattered. For the living and the dead. Cole secured what gear remained, redistributed ammunition, and placed her rifle within reach of Reyes. She pressed a flare tube into his hand. Red, single use. If movement came from above, fire once and roll downhill. It was instruction without words. She began the ascent alone. The climb cut through scree and slick stone. Each step required calculation, each foothold silent but deliberate. The wind tore against her shoulders, carrying fragments of ice that stung exposed skin. Her breath came hard, controlled through clenched teeth. The higher she climbed, the thinner the air, the sharper the quiet. By 200 hours, she reached the ridge. The smell hit first, charred fabric, oil, and something unmistakably human. The Overwatch site was nothing more than a shallow pit between rocks, blackened by explosion. Fragments of equipment lay scattered, radio plates warped by heat, glass from optics fused into the soil. At the center lay one body, half covered by a torn poncho. She knelt beside it, steady hands brushing away ash and grit. The insignia on the sleeve was barely visible, scorched into fabric. The shape of a Marine Corps emblem remained, faint but unbroken. He had stayed until the end. Cole's eyes traced the melted edge of a radio plate nearby, the markings barely legible under soot, RF 5800 serial 421, the same frequency as her Overwatch. The realization came slowly, not as shock but as comprehension. The site hadn't been destroyed by enemy fire. It had been detonated intentionally. A final transmission silenced before capture. The comms blackout had been their protection, not their failure. The Overwatch team had made a choice, to vanish so the rest could move unseen. Silence, she understood now, was sacrifice. Wind shifted again, scattering ash into the night. She stood in the faint glow of her headlamp, the beam catching the curve of spent brass and burned rock. Her fingers brushed a small object near the body, a dog tag fused to chain. The metal was bent, unreadable, but she kept it. She logged the discovery in her notebook. Overwatch confirmed. 1 KIA, equipment destroyed. Then a line beneath it, written slower. Silence held the line. Her hand lingered on the page. When she descended, dawn was beginning to break behind the eastern ridge. The air had softened from black to slate blue. The world below felt both vast and close, the kind of quiet that came after understanding. Each step down was heavier, but also cleaner. The weight of uncertainty was gone. In its place remained obligation. She reached the shelter near 0400 hours. Reyes was awake, eyes hollow but alive. The flare was untouched. Weller slept, chest rising shallow but steady. Cole checked them both, replaced the poncho that had shifted, and resumed her seat at the edge of the overhang. The mountain had settled again. Even the rain had ceased. She sat still, rifle across her knees, the dog tag cold in her hand. Her body trembled with exhaustion, but her mind was sharp, stripped of fear, stripped of hope, left only with clarity. Leadership, she realized, wasn't about returning home. It was about keeping faith with those who didn't. She looked toward the ridge she had climbed, a pale line against the morning light. Somewhere up there, silence still held. As the first beam of dawn touched the valley, she opened her notebook once more and marked a final line under the night's entry. Hold until light. Then she waited. Not asleep. Not awake. listening to the faint hum of the dying radio, the slow rhythm of breath beside her, and the steady pulse of a mountain that had rendered its judgment. Dawn came slow over the ridge, light spreading in thin, deliberate strokes across the valley. The fog that had cloaked the mountains began to lift, revealing outlines softened by distance and fatigue. The rain had stopped. The silence that followed was complete, but no longer cruel. Captain Erin Cole rose from her position beneath the overhang, her movements careful, deliberate. The ache in her muscles was deep, structural. Blood had dried along one sleeve, flaking as she adjusted her pack. Behind her, Reyes slept under a thermal blanket, pulse weak but steady. Weller still breathed shallowly, the rise of his chest rhythmic but faint. Cole stepped out into the open. The air was cold and thin, carrying the metallic taste of altitude. She looked upward toward the ridge she had climbed hours before. In daylight, it appeared smaller, less a mountain than a boundary between what had been endured and what remained to do. The world felt paused, as if waiting for her next movement. She reached into her vest pocket and withdrew the flare, the last one. Its surface was damp, scuffed, but intact. She turned it once in her hand, feeling its weight. The act of using it felt both final and fragile, a kind of faith against uncertainty. She climbed a short distance to higher ground, each step pressing into frost-softened earth. When she reached a flat stretch of stone, she paused, scanning the horizon. The valley stretched endless beneath her, a pale sea of mist caught in first light. She pulled the flare's pin. The hiss came first, then the rush of color, red smoke twisting upward through blue dawn. It rose slowly, curling and unfurling in ribbons that caught the sun. Against the silence, it looked almost alive, as if the mountain itself had exhaled. Minutes passed. Then came the sound, faint at first, a low vibration spreading through air and stone. Rotors, far off, but real. The noise grew, layered by distance and altitude until it filled the valley with motion again. The wind shifted with it, sweeping through the tall grass and scattering ash from the night before. Cole shielded her face as the helicopter appeared from the east, cutting through haze with disciplined grace. It circled once, assessing terrain, then descended slowly, rotors flattening the grass in waves. She waited until it stabilized before moving, not rushing, just measured, as if each step was an acknowledgement. The extraction crew disembarked in a fluid motion, medics first, then the loadmaster. No words were needed. They worked with efficiency, born from repetition. Cole guided them to the wounded, helping lift stretchers, securing straps. Her hands moved on instinct. Every motion, every breath carried purpose. When the last Marine was loaded, she paused beside the ramp. The valley stretched behind her, quiet under sunlight. The flare still smoked faintly, a red line against the pale sky. She turned once more toward the ridge, where the overwatch had burned, where silence had spoken. The memory was as clear as the air now, the radio's hiss, the mountain's stillness, the knowledge that some sounds would never return. As the helicopter lifted, dust spiraled upward in muted halos. The mountain grew smaller beneath them, its scars hidden beneath morning light. Cole sat near the ramp, helmet in her lap, eyes fixed on the landscape as it receded. Her reflection glinted faintly in the aircraft window, pale, exhausted, alive. She glanced toward the stretcher beside her. Reyes's hand rested near the edge, motionless, but warm. Across from her, Weller slept, face turned toward the cabin wall. The sound of the rotors became rhythmic, steady, grounding. For the first time in days, she let her shoulders settle back against the frame. Outside, a hawk circled in widening loops above the ridge, wings spread wide against the wind. Its motion was effortless, unbroken, a solitary figure tracing the boundary between air and stone. Cole watched it until distance took it from view. The mountain beneath them remained unchanged, eternal, indifferent, listening. She opened her notebook one final time and wrote a single line beneath the last entry. Extraction complete. Silence acknowledged. Then she closed it, resting her hand over the cover. The helicopter banked east, light spilling across the cabin floor. Cole's gaze stayed fixed on the horizon, a thin divide of gold cutting through cloud. Her expression was calm, her breathing even. The mission had ended, but something of it would not. As the valley faded behind her, she recalled the words once spoken by her mentor, a truth that had followed her from briefings to battlefields, now echoing quietly through her thoughts. The mountain listens longer than men do. The words lingered there, steady as breath, as the aircraft carried her away from the silence that had become her measure of endurance. What would you have done, standing there in the cold light of extraction, the rotor wash lifting the dust of everything you'd just survived, when the sound faded and the silence took hold again? Would you have called it victory, or just endurance with a pulse? She didn't say much. Captain Cole, most who make it back don't. The truth settles in quieter ways, in the weight of gear left behind, in the faces that don't board the bird. Sometimes survival isn't a gift. It's a debt you spend the rest of your life repaying in calm breath and quiet remembrance. If you felt that, tell me below. I read every word. Subscribe if you believe strength still comes from silence. Share this with someone who knows what it means to hold steady when the world falls apart. The mountain's still listening, and somewhere, so is she. Stay sharp.